Eunice talks about the horrible effects of short staffing. She talks about a resident who died recently. He should have been in the dementia ward, but he wasn't. And the facility did not have enough staff to properly monitor and care for him. He was wandering, and he came across Tide laundry detergent pods. He ate some, and he died. It is absolutely heartbreaking, and it should never, ever happen in a facility tasked with caring for our most vulnerable seniors. These residents deserve better, as do every single senior in this province. My question to the Premier, when will this government stop being so stubborn? The member from Wood River can heckle if he wants, but this is no laughing matter, Mr. Speaker. Their approach is disgusting. When will this government stop being so stubborn? When will it recognize we need minimum regulated care standards and safe staffing levels?
This government has had record revenues year after year. It's blown through every penny, drained the rainy day fund, and has racked up billions of dollars in debt. It has had 8 long years to get serious about childcare, but it's got nothing but weak excuses. Tara deserves better. Other families in our province deserve better. When will this government shelve the pathetic excuses and get serious about childcare?
Tara sought help from Sask Housing, and do you know what they offered this single mum and 2 young daughters, Mr. Speaker? This government offered her an apartment with the possibility of cockroaches and bed bugs infestation. Tara says, and I quote, "I was revolted. I was revolted. How can a government property have such low standards?" I want to know what the minister says about that.
A grade 4 student in our province has put up a poster in his school. He's selling lemonade to raise money for his school. The poster says, quote, "There are a bunch of budget cuts next year, and there will be, quote, less money to do arts and crafts, big events, and we will likely have fewer educational associates. There will be other cuts that we don't know about yet," end quote. So this 4th grader is selling lemonade because this government is letting him down and his fellow students down.
Right. Nothing in this government's plan to shut down Yarrow Youth Farm and relocate an open custody corrections facility into the Buena Vista neighbourhood makes any sense.
Over and over again, that minister has shown that she does not know her file. Right. And she has had to change plans over and over because she did not do her homework. Will she admit that keeping Besnard Lake closed is a mistake, and will she reverse that decision today?
Privatizing White Butte should be a non-starter for this government, full stop, period.
This government's approach to the big rail companies is appalling.
Right.
When a new report from APAS and Sask Wheat, Sask Pulse, Sask Barley said the big rail companies have overcharged grain producers at least $2 billion over the last 7 years, what did the Sask Party government do? They said they're not really concerned about that.
Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely bizarre and head-scratching why this government would insist on taking us backwards when it comes to the treatment that many patients need in the province. We have a properly functioning hyperbaric chamber in Moose Jaw.
Why is it so hard for that minister and government to say that Saskatchewan workers should never be displaced?
Hear, hear. Despite the government having 8 long years of record windfall revenues, we keep hearing about highways getting worse all throughout the province because this government wastes too much money too often.
A $128 million deal for Saskatchewan farmland, which delivered huge benefits to the Premier's former senior advisor and the Sask Party's former executive directors. No other deals like that will be allowed. So it's not surprising that more and more Saskatchewan people are starting to question, why is it that this government seems more interested in looking out for its friends than standing up for Saskatchewan people?
That minister, that government is clearly out of touch with the realities in everyday classroom across Saskatchewan.
Saskatchewan is the only province that charges for medically necessary transfers between centres, and that needs to change. Mr. Speaker, this minister seems to forget that their party has been in power for close to 8 years, Mr. Speaker, during times of record revenues, and he wants to talk about things that happened, Mr. Speaker, when the two of us were barely out of high school. Talk about backwards looking and a failure, Mr. Speaker, to be actually recognizing the huge burden that is being placed on patients here in Saskatchewan. Sarah Busis Gunn still owed $7,000 for ambulance service when her 7-year-old daughter, Leandra, died. Sarah says, Mr. Speaker, that she spoke to the Rural Health Minister by phone on March 25th. And that minister, Mr. Speaker, talked about how she could have perhaps followed other families' examples and had some steak night fundraisers to cover the massive ambulance costs for her little girl. Mr. Speaker, she recorded that phone call and shared it with us because she was so horribly disappointed by that minister's dismissive approach. Steak night fundraisers. We have the worst ambulance fees in the country, Mr. Speaker, and this government's response is to talk about steak night fundraisers and charity.
The federal government has handed the Canadian Wheat Board to a U.S. agri-food giant and a state-owned company from Saudi Arabia, an incredibly valuable organization that was publicly owned and farmer-controlled is now foreign-owned and Saudi-controlled. Stuart Wells, who was a farmer-elected Canadian Wheat Board director, calls this, quote, the biggest transfer of wealth away from farmers in the history of the country, end quote. On
social media, Sarah Buse's gun has warned Saskatchewan people, quote, if you need help affording Sask health care in an emergency, be prepared to have a steak night. That's what Saskatchewan Health Minister for Rural Saskatchewan told me. Now, in Sarah's email to my office after the minister's statement last Thursday, she said this, quote, I feel the need to defend our family, as we did fundraise. We used that money for lifts and wheelchair ramps and vans, as what we had access to didn't even come close to covering the costs of her needs. I have never in my life heard of a family fundraising for ambulance bills.
Louisa Moberly is 79 years old. She has Parkinson's, dementia, and heart troubles. She was in the L'Orange Health Centre for a couple of weeks, and she suffered many falls. Her family wants to know why.
Samantha Neal is speaking out today. She has a child with severe cognitive disabilities, and they rely on the Youth Companion Program at Radius. And this government just cut $65,000 per year that went into this program. How can the minister possibly justify this cut?
The people of Moose Jaw want to save the hyperbaric chamber. People throughout Saskatchewan want to save the hyperbaric chamber. Community organizations are even willing to help save the hyperbaric chamber. Absolutely everyone else gets it except the Sask Party government.
Since 2010, 97 children in care have died, now not counting the ones from natural causes. And that's heartbreaking. And while a children's advocate acknowledges that there has been some progress, he says that this government has a long way to go when it comes to protecting our vulnerable children. So, Mr. Speaker, when you have a long way to go, slow progress is not acceptable.
This government's whole approach has been a hands-off one, loosening up regulations, relaxing enforcement, and just letting industry police itself. To the minister, will he admit that this horrible sour gas situation shows the need for stronger regulations and more stringent enforcement?
He promised that care aides can feel free to speak out and raise concerns about the quality of care for vulnerable seniors. Why has that promise been broken?
This explanation from the Premier is absolutely unbelievable. It is ridiculous, Mr. Speaker, they're trying to spin this now. We have seen the disgusting actions that we saw with how they leaked this information. We've seen how they treated frontline workers, and we have the Premier admitting that it was his decision to release this information. He thinks everything is fine. This needs to be handed over to the Privacy Commissioner. It cannot be left in the Premier's office, who leaked the information in the first place. The Premier's entire argument yesterday, Mr. Speaker, was that he believes that leaking confidential information about a private citizen was necessary in order to protect the Premier's reputation and get him out of a conundrum. Conundrum is the exact word that the Premier used. He was in a conundrum, so he ordered the leak of confidential information about a private citizen. Nothing whatsoever in the legislation allows for a breach of privacy to protect the Premier's reputation or to help the Premier out of a conundrum. Will the Premier agree today to turn over all relevant emails, text messages, phone records, and other documents to the independent Privacy Commissioner?
I recognize the Premier.